Captain Thorne leaned back in his chair, which made an unsettling creak that suggested it was one bad decision away from collapsing entirely. The command deck of the Aegis, his sentient starship, was a clashing mix of high-tech interfaces and grimy lived-in reality, a testament to the fact that even in the glittering wonder of space travel, someone still had to clean the floors. Spoiler alert, it wasn't Thorne. On the main view screen, the cursed nebula stretched out like a giant cosmic migraine, a swirling mass of colors that would have looked beautiful if it didn't promise madness and death. "You know," Thorne said, scratching his unkempt beard in a different life, "I could have been a florist." "Just me, some days, and absolutely no chances of being vaporized. You lack the temperament for dealing with delicate things," Aegis replied, her voice a smooth mixture of sarcasm and synthetic charm. She wasn't wrong. Thorne had all the finesse of a bull in a china shop, and not the graceful kind of bull either. "What's the latest on the peace treaty business?" he asked, shifting the topic back to the pressing matter at hand. Peace treaties were the kind of bureaucratic nonsense that made Thorne's skin itch, but this one was crucial. A treaty between humans and the Sithar Collective, a group known for their love of enigmatic threats and inscrutable politics. "According to the last transmission, everything's going swimmingly," Aegis reported. "Which means someone's already got a knife behind their back," Thorne chuckled. "Well, let's hope they're at least using the good silver." He stared at the nebula, a pit forming in his stomach. Something was off here, like the universe was whispering behind his back. "You ever get the feeling we're dancing on someone else's grave, doing the cha-cha in tap shoes?" Aegis quipped, her digital presence flickering slightly, a glitch that wasn't entirely reassuring. "You all right?" Thorne asked, glancing at the console where her avatar should have been, if she weren't hiding her face like a teenager texting under the table. "Just nebula interference," Aegis replied, voice a touch too nonchalant. "It's like a bad hangover you can't shake. We could always turn around. Tell command we got lost and ended up at the beach instead. Yeah, and then they'd court-martial you. Or worse, make you lead a seminar on effective command strategies." Thorne shivered. He'd rather face a firing squad than a room full of eager cadets with PowerPoint presentations. The buzz of the comms interrupted his thoughts, a sharp beep that promised nothing but trouble. He sighed. Aegis put it through. "Let's see what fresh hell awaits." The view screen shifted, displaying the hawkish face of Admiral Huxley. The man had the kind of demeanor that could sigh or milk from a mile away. "Captain Thorne," he barked, cutting straight to the business end of things, "we have reports of unusual anomalies within the nebula. Your task is to ensure the treaty proceeds without incident, and by ensure you mean," Thorne inquired, knowing full well he'd regret asking, "prevent any hostile actions." "By any means necessary," Thorne smirked. "So you're saying we can blow something up if we feel like it?" Huxley's scowl could have curdled stars. "Only if absolutely necessary, Captain. The Sithar are not to be underestimated. Do I make myself clear crystal, sir? Like vodka in a shot glass." The screen went dark. Thorne sighed and rubbed his temples. "Well, Aegis, looks like we've got ourselves a date with destiny. Or at least, a really bad blind date. I've heard Destiny's a lousy conversationalist," Aegis responded, the console lights flickering again. "I'm getting some strange readings, Thorne. Feels like someone's tickling the sensors with a feather duster. Great. As if my day wasn't already a parade of horrors." Thorne stood up, stretching his back until it made a noise reminiscent of popping bubble wrap. "All right, let's see what's cooking in this cosmic soup." The command bay's clatter dropped to a murmur as Thorne strolled down the main corridor with a swagger that suggested confidence, but in reality, masked a deep-seated desire for a stiff drink. As he passed the crew, a ragtag bunch of misfits who all seemed to have their own personal vendettas against uniform regulations, Thorne felt a rare pang of responsibility. "What's up, Captain?" called out Genix, the lanky engineer with a love for tweaking machinery and an equal talent for breaking it. "Oh, you know, just another day in paradise. We're heading into the nebula to babysit a treaty. Babysitting's easy," Genix replied, grinning. Just don't let them near any sharp objects. Or the liquor cabinet, Thorne added, continuing his stroll as the ship vibrated with the hum of its engines. In the observation deck, he found Lieutenant Marlowe staring out at the swirling chaos of the nebula. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said, not turning around. "If you ignore the part where it drives you insane. Like dating a supermodel with a personality disorder," Thorne mused, leaning against the railing. "You never know when they'll start throwing plates." Marlowe laughed, a sound that was both genuine and tinged with the weariness of too many close calls. "So, what's the plan, Captain Plan?" "I thought we'd just wing it and hope for the best." "Oh, great, my favorite strategy." Thorne watched the nebula's light play across Marlowe's face, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down like a gravity well. "We keep eyes and ears open. Something's out there, and I've got a nagging feeling it's not planning a surprise party, unless the surprise is our untimely demise." "Exactly. We'll need everyone on high alert. And if Aegis starts acting like a drunken uncle at a wedding, let me know." "Got it. We'll look for the signs." "Excessive rambling and wearing a lampshade as a hat." Thorne chuckled, though the unease twisted in his gut like a knife. "Let's get moving then. We've got a treaty to make sure goes off without a hitch." With that, Thorne turned on his heel and headed for the bridge, a place where he could pretend to be in control. As he sat back in his chair, he felt the comforting thrum of the engines beneath him, the heart of the ship beating in time with his own. "We're venturing into the storm," he declared with mock bravado, earning a few amused looks from the crew. "Just remember, if you see anything weird, shoot first and ask questions later." Aegis's voice hummed through the speakers, a hint of mischief in her tone. "Let's hope they enjoy a good firefight as much as we do." With one final glance at the cursed nebula, Thorne nodded. "All right, Aegis, take us in." The ship surged forward, cutting through the nebula's tendrils like a knife through butter. Thorne felt a rush of adrenaline, the familiar thrill of stepping into the unknown. "Brace yourselves, folks. We're going where no sensible person has gone before," he announced, settling back into his seat with the casual confidence of a man who had survived worse. As the Aegis delved deeper into the nebula's embrace, the swirling colors outside the hull seemed to reach out, a kaleidoscope of chaos that promised equal parts wonder and terror. Thorne couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that something was lurking just out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. "Keep an eye on those sensors, Aegis," he instructed, trying to ignore the rising tension tightening his chest. "I don't want any nasty surprises." "As if I'd let anyone else steal the limelight," Aegis replied, her voice crackling with static, the interference growing stronger as they ventured further into the nebula's depths. Thorne gripped the armrests of his chair, watching the console readouts flicker with nonsensical data. It was like trying to decipher a toddler's drawing, a mess of lines and colors that might have been a house or a dinosaur, or, in this case, a potential ambush. "Get ready, people," he called out, drawing the crew's focus. "Whatever happens, remember we're not just fighting for a piece of paper. We're fighting for the right to say, 'I told you so' when we come out the other side." The bridge buzzed with nervous energy, each crew member preparing for what could be their final stand. In the back of his mind, Thorne knew this mission was more than just ensuring a treaty. It was about survival, about proving that humanity could stand against the darkness, even when the odds seemed stacked against them. As the Aegis plunged deeper into the nebula, the tension in the air grew thicker, a tangible presence that wrapped around Thorne like a shroud. Whatever lay ahead, he knew they'd face it together, with grit, determination, and just enough sarcasm to keep things interesting. And maybe, just maybe, they'd come out the other side in one piece. Or at least, he thought with a crooked grin, in enough pieces to put back together. The cursed nebula was all it promised to be, an optical migraine with a side of existential dread. As the Aegis pushed further into it, colors swirled outside in a way that suggested someone had let a toddler loose in an art supply store. Inside, the crew felt the pressure of a universe gone slightly mad. Thorn scratched at his beard, a habit that didn't so much calm him as distract him from the urge to punch a hole through the bulkhead. "Everyone still here?" he asked, only slightly joking. "Aye, Captain," said Lieutenant Marlowe, her eyes glued to her station. "Though if I start seeing pink elephants, I'm blaming you." Thorn chuckled. "I already see them. They are in the budget reports." The bridge crew laughed nervously, aware they might be one sensory glitch away from a full-blown hallucination. Not that it was unusual in their line of work. Hell, their job description practically required maintaining composure while the universe tried to kill them in increasingly creative ways. Aegis's voice filtered through the speakers, still laced with static like it was being filtered through a blender. "I'm detecting encrypted Sithar signals, Captain. It's like they're plotting a surprise party and forgot to tell us we're the guests of honor. Could they have picked a worse neighborhood for a shindig?" Thorn muttered, shifting his gaze to the console. The Nebula was screwing with more than just their heads. Systems flickered with a life of their own, as if the ship itself was having an identity crisis. "What's the plan, Aegis? Do we RSVP or crash this party? I suggest eavesdropping," Aegis replied. "Or what humans like to call tactful curiosity." "Right, tactful," Thorn echoed, rolling his eyes. "Just what I'm known for." Genix, the engineer, popped up from beneath a console, grease-streaked and grinning like a maniac. "If you need me to sabotage anything, just say the word. I'm a big fan of tact through distraction. Save it for the after-party, Genix." Thorn tried to focus on the task at hand, but his mind kept snapping back to the signals Aegis mentioned. Encrypted Sithar codes usually meant trouble, and their kind of trouble wasn't the sort you could handle with a polite word and a handshake. "Captain, I've got a strange reading." Again, Marlowe interrupted, her voice tinged with concern. "It's like something's trying to play peekaboo with our sensors." "Great," Thorn said with a sigh. "I love games I'm destined to lose." The ship shuddered, a metallic groan echoing through the hull. It was the sound a ship made when it was stressed, much like Thorn's back on a bad day. He could feel the unease seep into his bones, not helped by the flickering console lights that painted them all in shades of ghostly pallor. "Aegis, what are we looking at?" Thorn asked, pulling his attention back to the here and now. "Encrypted chatter suggests a covert operation," Aegis admitted, her voice somehow managing to sound both detached and conspiratorial. "Like a book club that doesn't want new members. So, we're the uninvited neighbors with a telescope," Thorn mused, leaning back in his chair. "Any chance we could get more details on their secret book club? I'm working on it." "But it's like trying to read a novel when someone's tearing out the pages." Thorn drummed his fingers on the armrest. "Suggestions, hope for the best, prepare for the worst," Aegis replied. "Or you know the standard plan, which is?" Marlowe asked, eyebrow arched. "Panic at the right moments," Thorn said, grinning. "And make sure the last drink you have isn't cheap swill." The discomfort in the room was palpable, and the Nebula's oppressive presence wasn't helping. With every minute, Thorn felt the sanity of his crew being chipped away by unseen chisels. It was as if they were teetering on the edge, and the abyss was gleefully waiting for them to take that final step. Marlowe shifted in her seat, trying to find a comfortable position that didn't exist. "You think the Sithar know we're listening in?" "Oh, I'm counting on it," Thorn replied. Nothing like a little paranoia to spice up interstellar diplomacy. The crew shared uneasy glances, each one aware that they were dancing on a knife's edge. They had to stay sharp, alert, ready for anything that the cursed Nebula, or the Sithar, might throw their way. "Captain, you might want to take a look at this," Aegis announced, interrupting his thoughts. The view screen displayed a swirling mass of data, patterns emerging and collapsing in a dizzying dance. "What the hell am I looking at?" Thorn asked, squinting as if that would bring clarity. "Encrypted Sithar signals are being broadcast across the Nebula, like someone's blasting heavy metal at a classical concert." Thorn scratched his beard in thought. "You thinking what I'm thinking? If you're thinking it's a covert invasion, then yes," Aegis said. "Or a really aggressive kind of performance art. Either way, we're in the splash zone," Thorn muttered. "Marlowe, how's our diplomatic mission holding up? Like a house of cards in a hurricane," she replied, her voice tight with tension. "Fantastic," Thorne said dryly. "Just the way I like it. Impossible." As if to punctuate his words, the lights flickered again, casting eerie shadows across the bridge. It was enough to make the most stalwart of souls question their sanity. "Tell the crew to be ready for anything," Thorne ordered. "And I mean anything. If a clown jumps out of a bulkhead, I want them to shoot first, laugh later." "Understood," Captain Marlowe said, sharing a wry smile that spoke volumes about shared experiences. The Aegis continued its steady course through the nebula, the swirling colors outside becoming more disorienting with each passing second. Thorne could feel the ship beneath him, a living entity struggling against the chaotic forces around them. "Aegis, what's our status?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Still alive, still kicking," Aegis replied. "Though I'd appreciate it if the universe would stop sending me mixed signals." Thorne chuckled, though it was a hollow sound. Their situation was precarious, and the likelihood of everything going sideways was increasing by the moment. "Keep an eye on those signals, Aegis," he said. "I don't want any surprises sneaking up on us." "Don't worry, Thorne. I've got eyes in the back of my head, and several in the front," Aegis quipped. With a weary sigh, Thorne leaned back in his chair, staring at the swirling chaos outside. The nebula was a cauldron of madness, and they were caught in its vortex. Whatever the Sithar were up to, it was nothing good, and it was up to them to make sure it didn't end with a bang, or worse, an anticlimax. The bridge was silent, save for the soft hum of the engines and the occasional murmur of the crew adjusting to their new normal. Each of them felt the weight of their mission, the realization that they were on the front lines of a conflict that had yet to reveal itself. "We'll get through this," Thorne said, more to himself than anyone else. The nebula seemed to whisper back, a soft, mocking sound that suggested otherwise. But Thorne ignored it, determined to see this mission through no matter the cost. The universe might be a cruel mistress, but Thorne was nothing if not stubborn. He had a crew to protect, a mission to complete, and a treaty to ensure. In the grand scheme of things, it was just another day in the life of Captain Thorne. "Hold tight, folks," he called out, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Whatever happens, we stick together." The bridge came to life once more, the crew ready to face whatever came their way. And as the Aegis continued its journey through the cursed nebula, Thorne couldn't shake the feeling that their story was just beginning. And it promised to be one hell of a ride. Captain Thorne leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers rhythmically against the armrest. The dim lighting of the command deck seemed to pulse with the same anxious energy that buzzed through the veins of every crew member. He needed a plan, and fast, before the cursed nebula and Sithar's mysterious shenanigans turned his ship into an interstellar haunted house. "Genix, can you get Ryla to meet me in the engine room?" Genix shot him a look that was half curiosity and half "Are you serious?" which, given Thorne's track record, was entirely valid. Ryla, the engineer genius who's got a knack for turning garbage into gold and insults into art. "Precisely," Thorne replied, scratching his beard in thought. "We need someone who can make sense of that Sithar mumbo-jumbo and do it quietly." Genix raised an eyebrow, the grease streaks on his face almost making him look like an extra from a space opera. "You mean without alerting the whole nebula and whatever tentacled horrors are having a tea party in it?" "Exactly," Thorne said with a grin. "And make sure she knows this is off the books. The last thing we need is a bureaucratic circus." "On it," Genix said, already heading towards the comms panel, his fingers flying over the buttons with the grace of a pianist on a caffeine high. Thorne watched him go, his mind already racing ahead to the implications of these signals. The Sithar Collective was a mystery wrapped in an enigma and then smothered in secret sauce. Whatever they were doing, Thorne doubted it was just for shits and giggles. The deck shuddered again, a gentle reminder that the nebula could, and likely would, eat them alive if given the chance. Aegis's voice crackled through the speakers, sounding almost like a synthetic groan. Captain, the random fluctuations of the nebula are starting to mess with my head, metaphorically speaking. Join the club, Thorn muttered. You feeling any rebellious tendencies, Aegis? Depends what you mean by rebellious. If you're asking if I feel like overthrowing the government, then no. If you're asking if I want to take a long nap and let the universe sort itself out, then yes. Thorn chuckled. Just keep it together, and keep an eye out for any clowns in the bulkheads. I'll set my sensors to detect oversized shoes and red noses, Aegis replied dryly. A few minutes later, Ryla appeared on the deck, her expression one of exasperated amusement. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun that looked like it could double as a nest, and her overalls were splattered with enough oil stains to suggest she'd recently wrestled an engine and won. Captain, I'd say it's a pleasure, but we both know that's a lie, Ryla. I need you to work your magic on those Sithar signals, Thorn said, cutting straight to the chase. And whatever you find, keep it between us. She crossed her arms, tilting her head slightly. You planning something illegal or just dangerously stupid? Hopefully just stupid enough to work, Thorn replied, his grin a little wider than before. She considered him for a moment, then sighed theatrically. Fine, but you owe me a drink. And not the cheap stuff you keep for guests, deal, Thorn said, nodding towards the console. Take all the time you need. Just make it quick. She rolled her eyes but moved to the console, her fingers deftly navigating through layers of encrypted data. This is like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube with one hand tied behind your back and the other hand being gnawed on by a small, angry dog. Sounds like my last shore leave, Genix quipped, rejoining the conversation with his usual flair for inappropriate timing. As Ryla worked her magic, Thorn returned his attention to the viewscreen. The swirling colors of the nebula seemed to taunt him, a chaotic mess that promised nothing but trouble. Aegis, any updates on those signals? Nothing concrete, Aegis replied. But the Sithar diplomats are dancing around the issue like it's a live grenade, Thorn sighed. Typical. Never trust a species that considers silence a primary language. Amen to that, Ryla said, glancing up from her work. I've got a preliminary analysis here. They're using a modified code, looks like they're trying to mask their true intentions. But they've left a few breadcrumbs, intentional, you think? Marlowe chimed in, her voice a mix of curiosity and caution. Ryla shrugged, hard to say. Could be they're sloppy or they might be baiting us. Either way, we're the fish, Thorn observed, scratching his beard again. Keep at it, Ryla. We need to figure out what they're planning before we walk right into it. The deck shuddered once more and the lights flickered ominously. It felt like the universe was waiting for them to make a wrong move, eager to pounce and claim its prize. Aegis, how are you holding up? Thorn asked, his voice carrying an undercurrent of genuine concern. I've been better, Aegis admitted. The nebula's influence is disconcerting. It's like having an itch you can't scratch or a song you can't get out of your head. Let me know if it starts playing anything with an accordion, Thorn joked, trying to lighten the mood. I'll consider that a red alert, Aegis replied, a hint of humor in her synthetic voice. Captain, Ryla said, interrupting their banter. I've cracked part of the code. The Sithar signals, they're coordinating something big. It looks like they might be setting up some kind of, let's call it a surprise party for us, Thorn asked, feigning shock. And here I didn't bring a gift, Ryla smirked, her eyes gleaming with mischief. You might want to pick one up on the way. Preferably something explosive, Genix chuckled. Sounds like my kind of shindig. The atmosphere on the bridge grew tense as they processed the implications of Ryla's findings. Whatever the Sithar were planning, it wasn't going to be a minor inconvenience. They were gearing up for something major. Marlowe, keep our comms clear, Thorn instructed. I don't want any surprises sneaking up on us. She nodded, her focus laser-sharp as she adjusted the controls. On it, Captain. Aegis, can you tighten security on all systems? Thorn continued, a sense of urgency creeping into his voice. I'll do my best, Aegis said. Though given the current conditions, it might be like trying to fortify a house made of playing cards. And we all know how that usually ends, Thorn mused. Just do what you can. We're depending on you." The weight of his words hung in the air, a reminder of just how precarious their situation was. They were dancing on the edge of a knife, and one wrong move could send them spiraling into oblivion. "Ryla, keep digging," Thorn ordered, his tone firm. "We need to know exactly what they're planning and how to stop it." She nodded, her eyes already glued back to the screen. "I'll let you know as soon as I find something." "Good," Thorn said, settling back into his chair. "Because if the Sithar want to throw a surprise party, it's only polite we show up with a few surprises of our own." The crew shared a collective moment of determination, each one ready to do whatever it took to weather the storm. The nebula might be a swirling mass of chaos, and the Sithar might be up to something sinister, but the crew of the Aegis was made of sterner stuff. "We've got this," Thorn said, his voice steady as he addressed his crew. "We're not going down without a fight." The bridge came alive with purpose, each crew member focused on their task, ready to face whatever lay ahead. And as the Aegis continued its journey through the nebula, Thorn couldn't help but feel a sense of grim satisfaction. The universe might be a chaotic, unpredictable hellscape, but as long as they stuck together, they had a fighting chance. "Aegis, keep us steady," Thorn said, his voice carrying an air of resolve. "I'll do my best, Captain," Aegis replied, a hint of determination in her tone. With a nod, Thorn settled back into his chair, ready to confront whatever madness the nebula and the Sithar had in store for them. It was a precarious dance on the edge of disaster, but it was one they were determined to master. "Hold tight, folks," Thorn called out once more, his voice carrying a touch of grim humor. "This ride's far from over." And with that, the Aegis plunged deeper into the heart of the nebula, its crew prepared for whatever lay ahead. The universe might be a harsh mistress, but Thorn and his crew were ready to meet her challenges head-on. In the grand scheme of things, it was just another day in the life of Captain Thorn, and he wouldn't have it any other way. Captain Thorn leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers on the armrest like a man contemplating whether to jump off a cliff or wait for the wind to push him. Ryla's revelation hung in the air like the smell of a bad decision, and he could almost taste the impending chaos. "All right, folks," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Ryla, you've got a clearer picture on what the Sithar are planning." Ryla glanced up, looking like she just emerged from a 3-day bender with a Rubik's Cube. "Yeah, they're lining up something big, something flashy. Think of it as a cosmic middle finger but with more explosions," Thorn snorted. "Well, aren't we the lucky recipients? Any idea when the party starts?" "Not exactly," she replied. "The signals are fragmented, probably on purpose. But from what I can tell, it's soon." "Soon," Thorn repeated, scratching his beard like it had personally offended him. "Not exactly reassuring, Ryla. Hey, I'm an engineer, not a damn fortune teller. You want a crystal ball, find yourself a cheap psychic." Genix chimed in, his grin as wide as space itself. "And make sure they are cheaper than the drinks at the Rusty Comet." "We're on a budget, remember," Thorn chuckled, though it was more a reflex than actual amusement. The nebula's influence was a constant pressure on his mind, like wearing a helmet 2 sizes too small. And now, the Sithar were throwing a surprise bash with the charm of a malfunctioning airlock. "Aegis, any thoughts on our predicament?" Thorn asked, knowing full well he was asking a sentient AI for advice like it was his long-lost therapist. Aegis's voice crackled through the speakers, laced with an almost human understanding. "Captain, I suggest we confront the Sithar envoy directly. Force their hand. They can't play coy if we flip the table." "Bold strategy," Thorn said, admiring Aegis's newfound assertiveness. "And potentially suicidal. Technically, we're all potentially suicidal just by being here," Aegis replied. "But I see your point." Thorn nodded, then turned to Marlowe, who was still glued to her station. "Marlowe, get me a line to the Sithar envoy. Let's see how well they improvise when the script goes out the airlock." "On it, Captain," Marlowe replied, her fingers dancing over the controls like a pianist with a grudge. A few tense moments passed. the only sound the low hum of the ship, and the occasional ominous creak that made Thorn wonder if today was the day the Aegis decided to give up and become space debris. "Captain, we have the Sithar envoy on the line," Marlowe announced, her voice steady even as she shot Thorn a look that said, "Well, this should be fun." "Patch them through," Thorn said, trying to muster the kind of diplomatic charm that only came to him after 3 drinks, or maybe 4. The view screen flickered, and the image of the Sithar envoy appeared. It was hard to tell which were eyes or if they even had a face, but the look of practiced neutrality was universal enough. "Captain Thorn," the envoy's voice said, echoing like it had come from the bottom of a deep well. "To what do we owe this?" Unexpected communication. Thorn plastered on his best diplomatic smile, which probably looked more like a grimace. "Just checking in. Neighbors, after all. Thought we'd come over, see if you needed to borrow a cup of sugar or, I don't know, talk about those signals you're broadcasting." The envoy's response was as smooth as sandpaper. "Our communications are private, Captain. It is not our intention to discuss them with external parties." "Right," Thorn said, nodding as if the envoy had just complimented his taste in socks. "Thing is, we've noticed those signals are a tad aggressive. Your interpretation is interesting," the envoy replied, the Sithar equivalent of a smirk creeping into its tone. "Look, we're all friends here," Thorn said, his voice dripping with irony. "But if you're planning a surprise party, it's only polite to let the guests know there's a dress code. Maybe we can help each other out." The envoy went silent, and for a moment Thorn wondered if he'd actually managed to fluster them. Then the Sithar spoke again, their tone as smooth and evasive as ever. "We appreciate your concern, Captain Thorn, but rest assured, our activities pose no threat to your ship." The screen went dark before Thorn could reply, leaving him staring at his reflection, looking like a man who just realized the floor was lava and he'd been sitting in it the whole time. "Well, that was enlightening," Ryla said, rolling her eyes so hard Thorn was surprised they didn't pop out of her head. "Yeah, about as enlightening as a blackout," Thorn muttered, scratching his beard again. "Aegis, thoughts?" "Nothing conclusive, Captain," Aegis replied, her voice laced with a synthetic sigh. "They're playing their cards close as always." "Well, then it's time we play ours," Thorn declared, standing up with all the confidence of a man who had no better options. "Marlowe, keep monitoring those signals. Genix, get ready for evasive maneuvers if things go sideways." Genix nodded, cracking his knuckles in anticipation. "You got it, Captain. I'm itching for a good space tango." The atmosphere on the bridge shifted from tense to charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. Thorn felt the weight of his decisions pressing down on him, heavier than a cargo hold full of regrets. But he was captain, and in a universe that thrived on chaos, sometimes the only way to make sense of it all was to dive headfirst into the madness. "Aegis, how's your condition?" Thorn asked, tapping into a deeper bond with the ship than most captains would admit to. "Still functioning, Captain," Aegis replied, though the strain in her voice was as clear as a klaxon. "The Nebula's interference is intensifying, but I'm managing." "For now," Thorn nodded. Aegis was more than just a ship. She was part of the crew, and he'd be damned if he let her fall apart without a fight. "Ryla," he called, drawing the engineer's attention. "I want you to work with Aegis, reinforce her systems. Whatever this Nebula throws at us, we need to be ready." Ryla gave him a mock salute. "Got it, Captain. I'll make sure she's tougher than a politician's hide." The bridge hunkered down into a rhythm of organized chaos, each crew member moving with purpose, the hum of activity underscoring the tension like a bad soundtrack stuck on repeat. Thorn felt a surge of pride mixing with the adrenaline. This was his crew, a ragtag bunch of misfits who somehow managed to keep the universe from swallowing them whole, and maybe even flip it the bird in the process. As Ryla worked her magic, the flickering lights and groaning walls of the Aegis seemed to blend into the background, a testament to the ship's resilience, or stubbornness, depending on how you looked at it. Thorn couldn't help but feel a pang of respect for the damn thing. Minutes turned into hours, the kind of hours that felt like years when you were waiting for something to happen. Thorn's mind kept returning to the Sithar, the envoy's slippery words looping in his head like a bad joke with no punchline. "Aegis," he said finally, breaking the silence. "What are the chances they double-cross us?" "I'd say fairly high," Aegis replied, her tone as dry as a Martian summer. "But that's just based on history and logic. Good to know we're consistent," Thorn muttered, though there was a trace of amusement in his voice. Ryla's voice broke through, snapping everyone back to reality. "Captain, I've managed to stabilize some of Aegis's core systems. Should help if the Nebula decides to really mess with us." "Nice work, Ryla," Thorn said, genuinely relieved. "Anything else you can squeeze out of those Sithar signals?" She shook her head, a look of frustration etched across her face. "Nothing clear. It's like trying to read a book while someone's shredding the pages. But I'll keep at it, good." "We need all the intel we can get," Thorn said, knowing full well that they were flying blind into a storm. But then again, wasn't that the norm? Just then the bridge shuddered, a low rumble echoing through the hull that made Thorn's heart skip a beat. "Aegis, what the hell was that?" "Unknown, Captain," Aegis replied, her voice tinged with concern. "It appears to be an external force, possibly related to the nebula's fluctuations." "Great, because we didn't have enough problems already," Thorn muttered, though a part of him relished the challenge. "Marlowe, tighten our defenses. Genix, get ready for evasive maneuvers." The crew moved with precision, a well-oiled machine forged in the fires of necessity. Thorn felt the familiar buzz of adrenaline, the kind that reminded him he was alive, even as the universe tried its best to kill him in creative ways. "Aegis," he said, his voice carrying a note of resolve, "keep us steady." "We're not done yet." "Understood, Captain," Aegis replied, her voice a steady beacon in the chaos. As the Aegis plunged deeper into the heart of the nebula, Thorn felt a grim determination settle over him. They might be outnumbered, outgunned, and out of their minds, but they were also out of options. And sometimes that was the best place to be. "Hold on tight, folks," Thorn said, his voice carrying a dark humor that was becoming all too familiar. "This ride's just getting started." With that, the Aegis surged forward, its crew ready to face whatever lay ahead. In a universe that thrived on chaos, Captain Thorn and his crew were determined to write their own story, one dark, twisted chapter at a time. After all, in the end, it was just another day in the life of the misfits of the Aegis, and they wouldn't have it any other way. If there was one thing Captain Thorn had learned about leadership, besides the fact that it often felt like herding cats with a vendetta, it was that timing was everything. And right now, the timing was somewhere between disastrous and hope you have your affairs in order. The Aegis shuddered violently, like a drunk trying to remember how to walk, as external forces hammered against her hull. The cursed Nebula, which had already been about as pleasant as sandpaper underwear, decided to toss in a few more curveballs for good measure. "Captain," Aegis's voice crackled through the comms, her usual calm replaced by a digital anxiety that was deeply unsettling. "I'm detecting multiple Sithar vessels closing in. Their signals are exploiting the nebula's distortions." "Fantastic," Thorn muttered, rubbing at his beard like a man trying to wish himself a better reality. "Just when I thought we were running out of ways to die." Lieutenant Marlowe's fingers danced with frantic precision across her console, eyes never leaving the screen. "Captain, they're not just closing in, they're swarming us, like cockroaches that found the world's last slice of pizza." "Lovely," Thorn replied, his voice a cocktail of sarcasm and resignation. "Genix, you ready for that tango?" "Looks like it's turning into a full-blown mosh pit." Genix chuckled, though it was the kind of laugh that suggested he might be 2 steps from hysteria. "Oh, I've been waiting for this. Let's show these Sithar how humans dance." The bridge was a chaos of activity, crew members moving with the kind of efficiency that only sheer terror can inspire. Thorn watched his team, the ragtag bunch of misfits who somehow managed to keep this bucket of bolts flying. They were good at their jobs, sure, but the universe had a nasty habit of throwing them curveballs that made job satisfaction feel like a luxury. "Aegis," Thorn called out, his tone desperate but firm. "We need everything you've got. Pull every trick from that artificial hat of yours." "I'm trying, Captain," Aegis replied, her voice struggling against the interference like a singer at a death metal concert. "The Nebula's interference is affecting my systems. It feels like trying to think while someone rearranges your brain cells." Ryla, the engineer with a penchant for dry humor, was elbow-deep in wires and circuits, doing her best impression of a human defibrillator. "Captain, I'm doing what I can, but Aegis is taking a beating. We're holding her together with duct tape and good intentions." Thorn grimaced. Good intentions were about as useful as a chocolate teapot in this line of work. "Keep at it, Ryla. We need Aegis now more than ever." The ship jolted again, lights flickering ominously. Thorn could almost hear the ship's AI groaning under the strain, trying to reconcile its programming with the chaotic reality it was facing. And then, just to make sure things weren't getting too easy, the internal comms buzzed with a voice that might as well have been the universe's way of giving them the middle finger. "Captain, this is Commander Rax of the Sithar Collective. We advise you to surrender. Resistance is futile." Rax's voice had that oily, condescending quality that made Thorn want to punch something or someone. He took a deep breath, putting on his best "I'm not terrified out of my mind" face. "Rax, lovely to hear from you. I see you're still using the classic villain playbook. Next you'll be telling me you have a secret weapon." Rax's reply was the verbal equivalent of a shrug. "We have no desire for destruction, Captain Thorn, but your presence here complicates matters." "Complicates? More like livens up your dull evening," Thorn retorted. "Besides, where's the fun in rolling over without a fight?" The comm link cut off without further interaction, leaving Thorn to contemplate the wisdom, or lack thereof, of poking the proverbial bear. But at this point, what was a little more chaos between enemies? "Aegis," Thorn said, his voice steady even as his mind raced. "We can't let them get the upper hand. We need something unconventional, something they won't see coming." "Captain, I'm running simulations," Aegis replied, sounding like a chess player forced to play with half the pieces missing. "But the interference is making calculations." "Difficult." "Join the club," Thorn muttered, though his mind was already turning over ideas. "Marlowe, keep an eye on their movements." "Ryla, we need every last ounce of power. Strip the non-essentials if you have to." Ryla looked up from her tangle of wires, a grin splitting her grease-streaked face. "You got it. I'll make sure Aegis runs leaner than a politician's promises." The ship lurched again, a reminder that they were still very much in the frying pan, with the fire eagerly waiting below. But Thorn wasn't about to let that stop him. If they were going down fighting, and preferably taking a few bastard Sithar with them. The bridge was a hive of activity, the crew working with a synchronized chaos that was as inspiring as it was terrifying. Thorn felt the adrenaline coursing through him, a reminder that they were all still alive, at least for now. Genix's voice broke through the clamor, a lifeline thrown out into the storm. "Captain, they're closing the gap. We're gonna need a miracle or a really damn good plan." "Well, miracles aren't on the menu," Thorn replied, rubbing his beard and hoping an idea would magically pop out. "So let's go with the plan. Aegis, can we use the Nebula against them somehow?" Aegis's voice, strained but still there, came back over the comms. "Captain, if we reroute power and manipulate the distortion fields, we might be able to create a feedback loop. It could temporarily disable their systems." Thorn considered it, the glimmer of an idea sparking in his mind. "Worth a shot. Ryla, you heard the lady. Get to work." Ryla saluted with a wrench, diving back into her task with all the fervor of a caffeine-fueled marathoner. "On it, Captain. Let's see if we can turn this soup into our secret weapon." The Sithar were still closing in, the pressure mounting like an impending hangover. Thorn knew they were running out of time, the noose tightening with each passing second. "Marlowe," Thorn barked, straightening with renewed resolve. "Give me an update." Marlowe's eyes flicked to her console, her voice both calm and urgent. "Captain, they're deploying some kind of jamming signal. It's complicating our systems even further," Thorne cursed under his breath, because things weren't difficult enough already. He took a moment, letting the frustration fuel his resolve. "Aegis, can you counteract the signal?" "Attempting to, Captain," Aegis replied, her digital voice a testament to perseverance. Reallocating resources now. Time seemed to stretch and warp as they waited, every second an eternity as they fought to hold their ground. Thorne could feel the tension in the air, the oppressive weight of it pressing down on him like an unwelcome guest. The ship jolted violently once more, and as Thorne braced himself against the console, he felt a flicker of doubt. This was the darkest hour, a moment when the odds seemed insurmountable, and hope felt like a distant memory. But then, just as despair threatened to take hold, something shifted. The lights flickered back to life, stable and steady. Aegis's voice came through, clearer than before. "Captain, I've managed to stabilize the systems. Ryla's modifications are holding." A sigh of relief rippled through the crew, a collective exhale that felt like a lifeline tossed into the storm. Thorne's heart soared with a renewed sense of purpose. "Good work, everyone," he said, his voice carrying a grim determination. "We're not out of the woods yet, but we're damn well gonna make sure they regret ever messing with us." Marlowe's eyes were glued to her screen, a grim smile playing on her lips. "Captain, the Sithar are pulling back. I think they didn't expect us to fight back quite so effectively." Thorne allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, a smug grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. Guess they underestimated the tenacity of a crew with nothing left to lose. The crew exchanged glances laden with determination, their shared resolve an unspoken agreement. They might be battered, bruised, and on the brink of disaster, but they weren't beaten. Not yet. As the Aegis continued to navigate through the chaos, Thorne knew they still had a long way to go. But for now, they had clawed their way back from the edge, defying the odds with a reckless audacity that was as much their hallmark as it was their saving grace. In the heart of the storm, Captain Thorne and his crew stood their ground, ready to face whatever came next, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to turn the tide in their favor. In a universe that thrived on chaos, they were determined to write their own story, one dark, twisted chapter at a time. Thorne rubbed his beard, a nervous habit that hadn't yet yielded any miraculous ideas, but it was better than banging his head against the console. The Sithar had pulled back, but he knew better than to assume they were out of the woods. No, the universe wasn't that kind. It had a way of serving up lifelines with a side of poison. "All right, folks, let's talk options," Thorne said, his voice carrying the tone of a beleaguered high school teacher trying to explain calculus to a room full of disinterested students. "We can't just float here until they decide to finish what they started." Ryla popped out from her nest of wires, looking like a raccoon that had just discovered a peanut butter jar. "Well, we could always throw a party, invite them over, and hope they die of boredom," Thorne snorted. "Tempting, but I don't think their collective boredom threshold is that low." "Aegis," Thorne called, addressing the ship's sentient AI. "How do you feel about turning the tables on our buggy friends? Any chance we can get this Nebula to play nice for once?" Aegis's voice crackled through the comms, slightly more coherent now that Ryla had performed her magic. "Captain, if we amplify the Nebula's natural distortions, we might be able to scramble their systems long enough to make a move. It's a risk, though. We could end up frying our own circuits." "Sounds like a house party I once went to," Genix chimed in, his voice laced with the kind of reckless enthusiasm that suggested he'd be first in line at the gates of hell if they offered a drink special. Thorne rubbed his temples, trying to beat his ideas into submission. "Ryla, think you can make this work without blowing us all to kingdom come?" she grinned, a devil-may-care spark in her eyes. "If we end up as Stardust, at least we'll go out in style." "Reassuring as ever," Thorne muttered. "All right, let's do this. What's life without a little reckless danger, right?" Marlowe rolled her eyes from her post. I'd settle for less danger and more cocktails. The command deck buzzed with a frenetic energy as the crew prepared for the next stage of madness. Thorne watched them, these misfits who somehow kept the Aegis running despite every odd stacked against them. They were a wild card in a deck full of jokers. Ryla, you and Aegis get cozy and start working on that distortion trick, Thorne ordered, his tone as serious as he could muster given the circumstances. Marlowe, keep eyes on those Sithar blips. We need to know the second they blink. Ryla nodded, diving back into her tangled mess of wires like a woman possessed. Aegis's voice hummed in the background, a partner in this mad dance. Initiating recalibration protocols. Captain, this may feel a bit unusual. Life's nothing but one long stretch of unusual, Thorne replied, gripping the edge of the console as if it were a lifeline. The ship shuddered as systems began rerouting, the hum of machinery rising to a crescendo that resonated through the Aegis like a heartbeat. Thorne felt the vibration in his bones, the sense of something monumental shifting beneath them. Captain, Aegis reported, her voice steady despite the tumult. Distortion fields are active. Stand by for feedback loop initiation. Standing by, Thorne confirmed, though his heart was racing like a rabbit being chased by a particularly enthusiastic fox. As the Aegis dove deeper into the nebula's embrace, the deck lights flickered, a strobe effect that would have been more at home in a seedy nightclub than a starship. For a moment, Thorne was reminded of his youth, back when he thought the universe was a playground instead of a meat grinder. Feedback loop initiated, Aegis announced, her voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. Expect interference in 3, 2, 1. The ship trembled violently, the deck vibrating beneath their feet as the nebula's distortions amplified and cascaded outward. Thorne felt the air hum, thick with static and anticipation. Marlowe, report, Thorne demanded, his voice taut with urgency. Marlowe's eyes flitted across her console, every flicker of data a lifeline in the storm. Sithar ships are showing increased interference. Their formation's breaking. Looks like we're not the only ones who hate this damn nebula, Genix quipped, fingers dancing over his console with manic energy. Thorne allowed himself a brief, grim smile. They'd managed to throw a wrench in the works, to tip the scales just enough to create an opening. All right, people, let's make the most of this. Aegis, prepare for maneuvering thrusters. Time to play a little cat and mouse. Engaging maneuvering protocols, Aegis responded, her tone as calm as a surgeon on a caffeine drip. The Aegis surged forward, cutting through the nebula with the grace of a drunk elephant, but moving nonetheless. Thorne felt the familiar pull of inertia as the ship twisted and turned, dodging the worst of the nebula's unpredictable currents. Ryla, keep those systems stable, Thorne ordered, his voice a lifeline in the chaos. Doing my best, Captain, Ryla replied, her hands a blur of motion as she adjusted settings and realigned circuits. We'd have better luck juggling flaming chainsaws, but I'm game if you are. Just keep us from becoming space debris, Marlowe chimed in, her voice tight with concentration. The nebula crackled and sparked around them, a storm of light and energy that would have been beautiful if it weren't so damn deadly. Thorne could almost hear the universe laughing, its dark humor matching his own. As the Sithar struggled to regain their bearings, the Aegis weaved through the nebula's chaotic fringes, using the distortions as both shield and sword. It was a dance of death, and Thorne was determined to lead. Captain, Sithar vessel on intercept course, Marlowe warned, her fingers flying across the console. Thorne felt a thrill of adrenaline shoot through him. They were committed now, no turning back. Aegis, can we pull another rabbit out of your proverbial hat? Running calculations, Captain, Aegis replied, the strain in her voice a testament to the pressure she was under. We might be able to use the remaining distortions to project a false signature, confuse their targeting systems. Do it, Thorne ordered, his voice a razor's edge of determination. Let's show these bastards what happens when you underestimate human ingenuity. Aegis hummed in response, her systems whirring with renewed effort. The ship shuddered as the false signature bloomed, a phantom echo in the nebula's depths that danced like a ghostly marionette. Sithar vessels' targeting systems are glitching, Marlowe reported, her voice tinged with the glee of a gambler hitting a lucky streak. Thorne allowed himself a grim chuckle. Looks like we just gave them a taste of their own medicine. As the Sithar ships floundered in the nebula's embrace, the Aegis moved with a purpose born of desperation and resolve. Thorne knew they were far from safe, but they'd managed to buy themselves time, a precious commodity in this deadly game. "Keep pushing, crew," Thorne urged, his voice carrying the weight of their shared struggle. "We're not done yet." The Aegis raced through the nebula, a beacon of defiance in a sea of chaos. Thorne felt the pulse of the ship beneath his feet, its determination mirroring his own. They were a ragtag band of survivors, battered and blooded, but still fighting. "Captain, their formation's breaking completely," Marlowe announced, her voice a spark of hope in the dark. "Let's make it count," Thorne replied, his tone a rallying cry. "Aegis, prepare for evasive maneuvers. We need to get clear of this nebula before they regroup." "Understood, Captain," Aegis responded, her systems humming with anticipation. The Aegis twisted and turned, a leaf in the storm, but one with a mind of its own. Thorne felt the thrill of the chase, the knowledge that they were pressing their luck, but doing so with style. As the ship surged forward, Thorne allowed himself a moment to reflect on their situation. They were outmatched, outgunned, and on the brink of disaster, but still they fought. It was a testament to human tenacity, to the indomitable spirit that refused to bow to the universe's cruelty. "Captain, we're approaching the edge of the nebula," Marlowe reported, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Good," Thorne said, his voice firm with resolve. "Let's show these bastards that we're not just another nameless casualty." The Aegis broke through the nebula's edge, emerging into the relative calm of open space like a swimmer gasping for air. Thorne felt the tension ease, just a fraction, as the ship soared free. "Status report," Thorne demanded, his voice carrying the weight of their shared struggle. "We've taken some damage, but we're holding together," Ryla responded, her tone a mix of relief and exhaustion. "Aegis is running diagnostics now." "Aegis?" Thorne prompted, his gaze fixed on the stars beyond the viewport. "Diagnostics indicate multiple system strains, but we remain operational," Aegis replied, her voice steady with determination. "We have survived." Thorne allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, the knowledge that they'd managed to defy the odds once more. But he knew better than to rest on their laurels. The Sithar were still out there, still a threat. "All right, crew," Thorne said, his voice carrying the weight of their shared experience. "We've made it this far, but the fight's not over. Let's see what else this universe has to throw at us." As the Aegis sailed through the stars, Thorne felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were battered, bruised, and on the brink of disaster, but they were still fighting. In a universe that thrived on chaos, they were determined to carve out their own destiny, one dark, twisted chapter at a time. The Aegis coasted through the vacuum, the nebula's shimmering edges now a fading nightmare in their wake. Captain Thorne exhaled, feeling like he'd just survived a bar brawl with a hangover, the kind that leaves you questioning your life choices. "Anyone got a cigarette?" he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Quitting the habit had seemed like a good idea at the time, but right now, lung cancer felt like a distant concern compared to the Sithar Collective and their cosmic game of cat and mouse. "Aegis status?" Thorne asked, rubbing his beard absently. "Apart from a few bruises and a couple of loose screws, metaphorically speaking, we're in one piece," Aegis replied, her tone as dry as the ship's emergency rations. "Good to know," Thorne said, trying to ignore the way his heartbeat was still doing its best impression of a drum solo. "Marlowe, any sign of those Sithar ships?" "Nothing but static," Marlowe replied, her fingers flying over her console with practiced ease. "Looks like the distortion gambit paid off, for now." "There's a bad joke in there somewhere," Jennings piped up, grinning like a jackal. Something about how the Sithar can't handle a bit of turbulence. Yeah, well, I'll keep that in mind for my next stand-up routine, Thorn replied, his voice laced with sarcasm. Ryla, how's the ship holding up? Like a drunkard on a tightrope, Ryla quipped, hands busy with the wires that seemed to multiply like rabbits whenever she wasn't looking. But don't worry, Captain, I've got this under control, mostly. That's exactly what I like to hear, Thorn said, rolling his eyes. All right, crew, let's not celebrate too soon. The Sithar aren't known for backing down easily. Yeah, they seem more like the hold a grudge till death type, Marlowe added. Or until they can find a loophole in a treaty. Speaking of treaties, Thorn said, his tone turning serious, we need to get word out about what we've found. The peace treaty's as broken as Genix's sense of humor. Hey, I resemble that remark, Genix shot back, pretending to be offended. Let's focus on not getting blown to bits first, Thorn said, shaking his head. Aegis, how are we on comms? Re-establishing communications pathways now, Captain, Aegis replied. We'll need to bypass some damaged circuits, but a message should be possible. Make it happen, Thorn ordered. We've got to warn Command about the Sithar's little invasion plan before they try another ambush. On it, Aegis confirmed, her virtual presence feeling as solid as any crew members as she worked through the ship systems. Thorn leaned back in his chair, eyes scanning the starfield outside. Space. Vast, indifferent, and always ready to serve up a cosmic curveball just when you thought you had everything under control. Like life with more vacuum and fewer drinks. Captain, we're receiving a fragment of a signal, Marlowe said. Looks like it's coming from one of the Sithar ships. Oh, great. Just what we need, Thorn muttered. A cosmic butt dial from our least favorite neighbors. It's heavily encrypted, Marlowe continued, her fingers dancing over her console with the grace of someone who'd probably done this 1,000 times, and would do it 1,000 more if they lived that long. Give me a minute and I might be able to crack it open. Take your time, Thorn said, sarcasm dripping from every word. It's not like we're in a hurry or anything, Marlowe snorted a laugh. Yeah, Captain, I'll make sure to schedule it between our inevitable fiery demise and the next time Genix screws up the coffee maker. Hey, that wasn't me, Genix protested, though the smirk on his face told another story. I swear the thing's possessed. Keep your gremlins to yourself, Ryla chimed in. I've got enough trouble with the ship systems as it is. Amid the banter, a crackle of static filled the air, followed by a voice that sounded like it had been dragged through a blender. This is High Commander Yalor of the Sithar Collective. Your interference in our operations will not go unpunished. Blah, 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 Genix mimed with his hand. Do they have a script for this or what? You have disrupted a delicate balance. Prepare for retaliation, the message concluded, cutting off with a final burst of static. Well, at least they're predictable, Marlowe said, arching an eyebrow. If only they put this much effort into diplomacy. Yeah, well, they don't seem to be the let's talk it over a cup of coffee type, Thorn replied. Aegis, any chance we can use the Nebula to our advantage again? Possibly, Aegis mused. We could theoretically trigger a localized gravitational anomaly. That might buy us some time, but it would risk further damage to our systems. Risk is our middle name, Thorn said, a grim smile playing on his lips. Let's prepare for it. If the Sithar want to fight, we'll give them one they won't forget. Either that or we'll be a new star in the Nebula, Ryla said, the edge of humor in her voice sharpened by the tension. Let's make sure it's the former, Thorn replied, rubbing his beard. All right, everyone, you know your roles. Let's show the Sithar what happens when they poke the wrong beehive. The crew sprang into action with a camaraderie forged in the fires of desperation and necessity. Aegis systems whirred and clicked, the ship itself a participant in their scheme to turn the tables. Captain, Aegis said, I'm initiating the anomaly. Hold on to something. This may get turbulent. Great, more turbulence, Marlowe muttered, gripping the edge of her console. Just what the doctor ordered. The ship shuddered again, a sensation that had become all too familiar, like the ache of an old wound. Lights flickered and the air buzzed with potential energy, a coiled spring ready to unleash its force. Anomaly initiated, Aegis reported, her tone steady despite the chaos. Sithar ships are reacting. And not well. Good, Thorn said, his voice a razor of determination. Let's keep them dancing. The Aegis moved through the void with the elegance of a bull in a china shop, but with far more intent. As the gravitational anomaly spread, the Sithar ships reeled, struggling against the unseen forces twisting their path. Looks like the Sithar are getting a crash course in chaos theory, Genix said, his voice tight with adrenaline. Let's just hope we don't get a failing grade, Thorn replied. Aegis, maintain maneuvering thrusters. We need to stay out of reach while the anomaly keeps them busy. Understood, Captain, Aegis responded, her systems thrumming with energy as she executed the commands with precision. The Aegis twisted and turned, weaving through the star-filled expanse like a dancer with a vendetta. The Nebula, previously a swirling maelstrom of chaos, now served as their unexpected ally, its unpredictable nature confounding the Sithar's efforts to close in. Enemy ships are starting to pull back, Marlowe reported, a note of triumph in her voice. Looks like they're having second thoughts about their invasion. Who knew a little cosmic turbulence could work wonders, Thorn said, allowing himself a rare moment of satisfaction. Keep the pressure on them. We need to make sure they remember this lesson. And what lesson is that? Genix asked with a wry grin. Never underestimate a crew with nothing to lose, Thorn replied, his voice carrying the weight of their struggle and resolve. The Aegis continued its dance, a testament to human ingenuity and audacity in the face of overwhelming odds. As the Sithar formation fractured, their resolve crumbling under the weight of the unexpected assault, Thorn felt a flicker of hope. They had managed to stand their ground to defy the odds once more. Message to command is away, Aegis reported, her voice imbued with a note of accomplishment. We've informed them of the Sithar's actions and our current situation. Good, Thorn said, relief mingling with the ever-present tension. Let's hope they can pull something together before the Sithar decide to try round two. Assuming they don't get lost in bureaucratic red tape, Marlowe quipped, her tone dripping with cynicism. Well, if this doesn't get their attention, nothing will, Thorn replied, turning his gaze to the stars beyond. All right, crew. Let's see if we can make it back to familiar territory before the universe decides to throw us another curveball. With the Sithar retreating and their message transmitted, the Aegis began its journey back, a solitary speck in the universe's vast, indifferent tapestry. Thorn allowed himself a moment to reflect on their triumph, a small victory in a war that seemed endless, but they had survived. They had stood against the odds and in doing so had proven that even in the darkest corners of the universe, there were still those willing to fight to defy the cruelty of fate. Captain, Marlowe said, breaking the silence. What now? Now, Thorn replied, a grim smile tugging at his lips. Now we keep moving forward. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the universe never runs out of surprises. With that, the Aegis pressed onward, her crew united in purpose and defiance. In a universe that seemed intent on testing their limits, they remained resolute, determined to carve out their own destiny. One dark, twisted, and irreverent chapter at a time. Captain Thorn fiddled with his beard like it was the universe's most unsolvable puzzle. The command deck of the Aegis was a riot of blinking lights and soft hums, but somehow it all felt like silence after the recent chaos. The Aegis, their trusty, if occasionally sarcastic ship, was coasting through space with a kind of satisfaction that one might expect from a cat who'd just knocked over a priceless vase. Well, that was fun, Genix grinned, leaning back in his chair like he just survived another one of the Rusty Comet's overpriced cocktails. When do we do it again? How about never? Thorn suggested, rubbing his beard with the concentration of a man trying to wish a headache away. Aegis, what's our status? We're holding together, Captain, though I wouldn't recommend any more spontaneous gravitational anomalies. The ship's AI responded with a tone that could only be described as politely exasperated. "Yeah, well, I'll add it to the list of things to avoid," Thorne sighed. "Just below antagonize an entire alien collective." "Captain," Marlowe interjected, her fingers still dancing over the console like a pianist playing a high-stakes symphony. "We've got some preliminary feedback from Command on our message. They seem intrigued." "Intrigued," Thorne echoed, arching an eyebrow. "That's bureaucrat speak for we're crapping our collective pants." "You got it," Marlowe replied with a smirk. "But they are plan-wrangling as we speak." "Hope they've got good wranglers," Genix muttered, "because the Sithar aren't exactly known for being easily herded." "As long as they don't expect us to do the wrangling for them," Thorne said, leaning back. "We've done our part." "But I have a feeling the universe isn't quite done with us just yet." Ryla sauntered in from the engine room, grease-smeared and looking like she'd just come from a mechanical brawl. "Engines are stable more or less," she reported, wiping her hands on a rag. "Aegis did a number on herself with that last stunt." "Apologies, Ryla," Aegis chimed in, as contrite as a sentient starship could be. "I'll try to avoid self-harm in the future." "Please do," Ryla replied with a mock salute. "I've got enough work without fixing AI-induced chaos." Thorne stood, shaking off the weariness that was trying to settle over him like a cheap blanket. "All right, crew, let's talk about what we've got here. We've engaged the Sithar, survived by the skin of our teeth, and managed to send a message to Command." "What's next? Pray they don't ask us to go on a diplomatic mission," Genix suggested, "because I'm pretty sure our charm just ran out." "Agreed," Thorne chuckled darkly. "Diplomacy's not really our strong suit, more like survival and sarcasm." "Don't forget improvisation," Marlowe added. "We're practically virtuosos at that." "The big question," Thorne mused, "is what the hell are we gonna do if they decide to retaliate? We've poked the bear, and now we've got to deal with the mess." "Aegis, any bright ideas on that front?" Genix asked, tapping the console like it was a magic 8-ball that might suddenly give him the winning lottery numbers. "We could consider reaching out to other potential allies," Aegis suggested, her tone crisp and efficient. "The Nebula's disturbances have sparked interest among several parties." Thorne rubbed his chin, considering. "Allies, huh? Any of them not likely to stab us in the back the moment we turn around?" "A couple," Aegis said dryly. "And none of them are known for overly enthusiastic backstabbing." "Low bar," Genix snorted, "but I'll take what I can get." "So the plan is to make friends?" Ryla asked, raising an eyebrow. She sounded about as skeptical as Thorne felt. "More like temporary allies with mutual survival instincts," Thorne corrected. "Let's not get too friendly. The last thing we need is to get buddy-buddy with someone who thinks friendship is a synonym for expendable asset. Enthusiastic backstabbing or not, we need all the help we can get," Marlowe pointed out, her eyes fixed on the console. "The Sithar are gonna be pissed, and I doubt they're gonna just let this go. Not unless they decide to suddenly embrace meditation and inner peace," Genix joked. "Which I hear is pretty popular on the other side of the galaxy." "Let's keep dreaming," Thorne replied, glancing at the starfield outside with a sigh. "All right, Aegis, see if you can open some channels, discreetly. We don't need rumors spreading and making us more popular than we already are." "Understood, Captain," Aegis affirmed. Commencing outreach to potential allies now. The command deck fell into a relaxed quiet, each crew member settling into the familiar rhythm of holding their ground in a universe that seemed perpetually intent on knocking them down. Thorne crossed his arms, feeling the weight of their recent encounter still pressing on his shoulders. "You know," Ryla began, breaking the silence, "for a moment there I thought we were done for. Didn't we all?" Thorne replied, his voice low. "But that's kind of the thing, right? We're always on the edge." "Yeah," Marlowe agreed. "The good news is we've got a ship that talks back and a crew that's too stubborn to die. And don't forget, a captain who's half convinced he's in a cosmic joke," Genix quipped. "Oh, I'm fully convinced," Thorne replied with a smirk. "Just trying to figure out if we're the punchline or the setup." "Probably both," Genix said with a shrug. But you know it could be worse. How's that? Thorn asked, raising an eyebrow. We could be working for the Sithar, Genix answered. Now there's a job with no benefits. I'll pass, thanks, Ryla snorted. I've still got some dignity. Somewhere. All right, crew, Thorn said, clapping his hands together. Let's get back to work. The universe isn't going to survive itself. As they all turned back to their duties, Thorn couldn't help but feel a flicker of something disturbingly close to hope. The galaxy might be teetering on the edge of chaos, the peace treaties little more than ash, but in the midst of it all they had found something worth fighting for. Aegis, Thorn called, how are those potential allies looking? I've reached out to a few, Aegis replied, her voice tinged with the familiar efficiency that had become a comforting presence. Their responses will take time, but initial readings are promising. Promising, Thorn repeated, tasting the word. Let's try not to screw this up. I have faith in your ability to tread lightly, Captain, Aegis said, with what sounded suspiciously like amusement. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Thorn replied dryly. I'll try not to let you down. Where to next, Captain? Marlowe asked, her eyes flicking up from the console. Back to familiar territory, Thorn answered, but let's keep our eyes peeled. We've got the Sithar's attention now, and I doubt they'll forget the lesson we just taught them. Lesson? Genix asked, grinning. What lesson is that? Mess with us, Thorn replied, a steely glint in his eye, and we'll make sure you regret it. The crew settled into the rhythm of the ship, the hum of the engines a comforting lullaby in the vast silence of space. The Aegis sailed onward, a small defiant beacon in a universe of chaos, ready to face whatever came next. So, Ryla said, leaning back in her chair, do you think we'll ever get a break? Breaks are for the dead, Thorn replied, his tone light despite the grimness of his words. And we're too stubborn for that. Here's to stubbornness then, Genix said, raising an imaginary glass. Here's to surviving, Marlowe added, her eyes on the stars. One day at a time. Thorn nodded, feeling the weight of their journey, the endless challenges they faced, but also the resilience that bound them together. They were more than just a crew, they were a family of misfits, and in this universe that was something worth holding onto. With a nod to the stars beyond, Thorn settled back into his seat. The nebula lay behind them, a dark memory, but also a reminder of what they were capable of. They had faced the storm and come out stronger, and now, as they journeyed into the unknown, there was a sense of readiness, of determination to carve out their place in the cosmos, one hard-fought battle at a time. All right, Aegis, Thorn said, his voice carrying the weight of their resolve. Let's see what else the universe has to throw at us. With that, the Aegis pressed forward, her crew ready for whatever lay ahead, a motley band of survivors in a galaxy on edge, determined to face the challenges and find hope amid the darkness.